Welcome to the CSPC 2024 interview series. My name is Kathy, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of British Columbia. I'm a volunteer at the Canadian Science Policy Conference, and today I have Dr. Evan Fraser with me. Dr. Fraser is the director of the Aero Institute, as well as a professor of geography at the University of Guelph.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks for being here with us today.
I'm so happy to be here, Kathy. Thank you for inviting me.
I'll jump straight in then.
That sounds great.
So the first question I want to ask you has to do with food processing systems. So in this past August, you wrote an op-ed about how Canada and BC is really behind in terms of the food processing systems that we have in place. Can you tell us more about which levels of government assume responsibility and for what in terms of the food growing, processing, et cetera space? And also, what do you think is one policy that any level of government can implement to improve the current situation?
So it's such a good question, and the op-ed I wrote in August of 2024 was after a soft fruit processing facility in British Columbia had closed. And the Okanagan orchardists were faced with the situation where they had to let their fruit rot in the orchards because there was nowhere after the farm to take those fruits, to wash them, to package them, to process them, and to actually get them into the market. And what struck me as particularly sad about that moment was two things. First of all, I studied that sector of the economy 25 years ago at the University of British Columbia, where I also did my PhD. And the big question 25 years ago was, what happened to BC's food processing sector? 25 years later, we're still having the same conversation. At the same time this year, we were also experiencing, and have been experiencing, record runs on Canadian food banks. The food banks, the emergency food charity sector, has never been busier because food insecurity is extremely high in this country. So I was left with this sadness this summer. On one hand, that we haven't solved the problem we've known about for my entire career. And secondly, that we're in the situation where fruit is going to rot while children are going hungry, and in the same province. So I wrote the op-ed. That's not the question you asked, though. You asked the question of what should a policymaker do? Well, I think there's a number of things policymakers need to do in order to build up the food processing sector. One, there's a number of land use zoning requirements that could be changed to make it easier for a food processor to get permission to build a new facility. Two, we could offer low-cost loans or ability to write future revenues off against capital investments, which would encourage investors to put money into the food processing space. So that's a second one. A third one would be consumer awareness and buy local programs. So those are three very, very effective methods that could be used that would build back up our food processing sector. I think that in terms of one single policy that I think would be extremely important, I would choose the second of those two. I would ask the financial sectors, the Farm Credit Canadas or the Royal Banks, the people that are loaning money to entrepreneurs in this country, in particular agriculture and food entrepreneurs, I would ask them to consider if there were special incentives they could offer to processors in order to help provide an incentive to invest in that sector of the economy.
That's really interesting. That is not targeting food insecurity from a financial perspective by giving more incentives to build these processing plants in the first place. That's not something I think most people have really considered, because I think we all love our farmers markets, and some of us may or may not be more knowledgeable about land use, but you make
let me build on this in two ways there, Kathy. The first is about 2 weeks ago, so we're now talking about early, mid-October 2024. I did an hour of a call-in radio show in Alberta. It was called Alberta at Noon. It's on CBC Radio, and the topic was food prices. And consumers were calling in to CBC to talk about how they were adapting to rising food costs. And they were saying things like, well, we're not buying as much beef because beef's too expensive, we're buying more chickpeas. And things like that, just proper, sensible things that consumers can do to help lower their food costs. My role on that call was to explain why food costs were high. And I had to say things, when the host asked me, I had to say things like, well, Russia invaded the Ukraine, and that's disrupted global grain supplies, pushing prices up. In addition, Russia is a major supplier of natural gas, and natural gas is a key cost driver for producing fertilizer. So when natural gas prices go up, fertilizer prices go up. Then I had to say things, well, there's a bad drought in California where we get most of our lettuce from and our produce. And then I had to say, and a huge amount of our food system is dependent on temporary foreign workers, both in the US and in Canada. And both the Canadian and American governments are restricting temporary foreign workers from coming in and working in these capacities. So all of these factors are pushing the price of food up. And what it struck me as I was doing that call-in show, Kathy, was that when we're talking to consumers, we're asking them to sort of cut back, or high prices are making it hard for them to make ends meet. But really, we're all being victims of these huge global forces. And we shouldn't be in a situation where we are vulnerable to armies in Europe invading each other for our food prices. Or we shouldn't be vulnerable to a new American administration that's going to make it harder for farmers in California to access Mexican labor. It's a crazy system that we are in, where our food prices are dependent on these things that are happening in other parts of the world. So I think strategic investment in food processing, but also food production and distribution, sort of at a local level, at large scale, technologically sophisticated, but at a local level, so that food doesn't have to cross as many, food or food inputs don't have to cross as many borders. I think that's a strategy that we're going to have to think about in the future.
For sure. I wanted to dig a little bit deeper, especially when you talk about the changes in American administration.
Yeah.
As we know, there has been a change
Big change, yeah.
and that will be taking place next January. And as you've already touched upon, there is the new administration has proposed changes to laws that enable migrant workers to work on these farms. I'm wondering what you think the impact will be on Canada broadly, and also what should the Canadian government do? Should they do anything, and how can they act preemptively on this?
So the issue of labor and how it intersects with politics is a ginormous topic, and we don't normally think about it when we talk about food security or food systems or agriculture or things like that. But the reality is the vast majority of low-paid jobs in the food system, whether that's an Uber driver or a short order cook or a waiter or a waitress at a restaurant, or someone working at a food processing plant or an abattoir, or picking fruit in the summer, the vast majority of that labor is done by new migrants, somehow defined. Some of those people are coming in and they're simply new Canadians. They came in on student visas and they're driving Ubers in the evening to make a little bit of money. A lot of those people come in to Canada on temporary foreign worker visas, specifically to work on farms. If we restrict access to that supply of labor, we will see food prices rise. Now, that's not a good situation, and I'm not saying that this is a good situation to be in, far from it, but we are today dependent on cheap foreign labor to run our food system. The same is true in the States. And for something like fruits and vegetables, we're somewhere but like 90% of our fruits and vegetables come from the United States. If the American farmer or the American food production system can't access labor, that will directly turn, I think, into higher prices. And with regards to American imports, it will be higher prices on fresh fruits and vegetables. Those are the things that we should be eating more of for health, to have a healthy lifestyle. So it's a tough situation. I mean, one, I don't think the current situation is very fair on the workers themselves. Two, I don't think it's very fair on Canadian consumers who are vulnerable to things that are way beyond their control. And so I think we have to have a policy response. And the policy response probably has to have three key dimensions. The first dimension is we need access, at least in the short and medium term, to foreign workers to keep the food system running. And we should work to make sure that those people are paid living wages and given pathways to citizenship and all the rights and respect and responsibilities of a Canadian worker. Now, most situations in Canada are not exploitative, but you can't say the same about the US, and there are some problems within the Canadian system. Point two, we need to automate our system more and reduce the labor dependency on it. And there we need to be investing in things like robotic harvesters for fruit, which is technologically very, very sophisticated and very, very hard, but that will be part of our strategy. And then the third strategy is we need to recruit more talented young Canadians to work in agriculture and food in the future, and we need to shore up our labor requirements domestically. And so I'm always talking to high school students about, well, if you're interested in robotics or artificial intelligence, think about using those skills in a food or an agricultural setting. And so I think we need to do a better job of recruiting young Canadians into the sector.
Thank you for painting a very comprehensive picture of how we can improve the resiliency of our food systems, not just in terms of having enough, but also in terms of having access to fresh fruits and vegetables and not being as reliant on international politics and events. Diving a bit more deeply into the Aero Institute. So recently, you hosted a summit with the theme Fueling Innovation Through Food. What do you think is the biggest barrier to getting agricultural innovations on the market? And how can policy help to mitigate the risk of generating these innovations?
Yeah, so over the last 2 years, myself and some colleagues at Aero Food Institute at the University of Guelph, we've really tried to dig into this issue of how to bring innovations more seamlessly, with less friction, with less cost, into the food system. And we hosted a series of workshops and roundtables. We did about 100 interviews with experts around the country. We really tried to do a deep dive on this question. And the main headline is that this is an opportunity for Canada. Canada should embrace the idea that as the world heats up and gets more crowded, there will be a real pressing need for more healthy and sustainable food that we can produce with less land, with less greenhouse gas emissions, with less inputs, with less environmental impact. So we need to embrace, I think, as a country, this more food production with less impact sort of mentality. I really do think that. I think innovations are the way to achieve that goal. And in this report that we put out, we suggest 4 broad policy strategies. The first strategy is that we need to help and create programs and policies to help entrepreneurs bring their ideas to market and get their companies to scale. So Canada's great at doing research. We have wonderful world-class universities like Guelph and UBC where you and I get to hang out. We have great research institutes, but too often entrepreneurs either run out of money before they can launch their company successfully or they move to the States. So there's programs and policies to help support entrepreneurs in agriculture and food go to scale. A second key part of our strategy would be to provide incentives for investment in this space. Agriculture and food requires what we call very patient capital. These are investors who are willing to wait a while for their returns on investment, because it takes a lot longer to bring a new crop to market or get a group of farmers convinced to use a technology or build a food processing plant. It takes a lot longer to see an investment return on that kind of investment than, say, developing a new piece of software where you can get your ROI, your return on investment, much more quickly. So we need structures and policies that reward investors who are willing to be patient. And there's a whole lot of policy making to do around creating financial rewards. Point 3, we need a really robust policy environment to ensure that the benefits of ag innovation are equitably distributed. That traditionally marginalized groups and equity-seeking groups, say racialized entrepreneurs or indigenous communities, that sort of entrepreneur not only benefits but also plays a leadership role, co-owns, and helps direct this exciting project that I think our country should be on. So I think there's a lot of policy making around sharing the benefits and being equitable about the growth potential. And then the final thing I think we really need to do is something I said a few minutes ago, which is we need to be creating programs and policies to incentivize young Canadians and talented youth to be thinking about feeding the future and saving the planet as things that they can get passionate about and that they can devote their career trajectories to. So those are the 4 broad areas that I think we need to be digging into, and I'd really appreciate things like the Canadian Science Policy Centre for allowing us the opportunity to talk about these things.
For sure, I think it's super important to really discuss the impact of labor, like domestic, international, as well as the impact of our financial systems and what it rewards and how it funds agriculture in terms of food security.
Yeah.
My final question to you is, What is your opinion on the Canadian Science Policy Centre and its position in the community as a connection hub, knowledge mobilizer, and talent incubator in the science and innovation policy landscape?
So I am a huge fan of the CSPC. I think it is an absolutely remarkable organization. I can't think of anything quite like it in other places that I travel. My entire career has been at the science policy interface. I do a lot of work with the federal government and with the European Union and the European Commission and with the United Nations, all on that interface between science and policy making. And there's a lot of dimensions there that we need to unpack and keep focused on. Science policy making is, as you just said, is about incubating talent. It's about communicating with broad and diverse audiences. It's about taking the cutting edge knowledge that we develop as researchers embedded at universities and making it practical, because too often those peer-reviewed journal articles that we spend the majority of our time aren't written in the right language, they're not at the right length, they don't land at the right time, and they don't specifically answer policy questions. So I'm so grateful that there's organizations like CSPC which help mediate or intermediate that scientific research-led, inquiry-driven research that we are all passionate about as people embedded in universities, and make it and give us a forum for making it practical and tactile for real-world decision making. And if you don't have that, you've got part of the problem, part of the solution, which is the answers and the understanding, but you don't have the applied insights. And I think CSPC and organizations like CSPC really help us be agents of change as researchers.
Thank you so much for your high praise, and thank you so much for your time today. This was a super interesting discussion for me, and I hope that the audiences online also found this to be insightful as well. Thank you for listening.